Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Wistrand, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Kennan Institute. Thank you for joining us for a discussion of the book, Seeing Red, Russian Propaganda and American News by Sarah Oates and Gordon Neal Ramsay. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to remind you that you can stay up to date on the Kennan Institute's activities by visiting the Kennan Institute's website and subscribing to our blogs and podcasts and other publications. I'd also like to take a moment to announce that we have a discount code for those of you who would like to purchase a copy of the book, which is the subject of today's discussion. So you'll see a couple copies up here, which obviously our guests will talk about. Unfortunately, we have a limited amount, so we recommend you order it online. And Oxford University Press's website has kindly provided the discount code AAFLYG6 for checkout, and you get a 30% discount, and I'll mention that again at the end of the discussion. So today's guest is Dr. Sarah Oates. Dr. Oates is an Associate Dean of Research at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. She's a UMD Distinguished Scholar, teacher, and co-principal on the Grand Challenges Maryland Democracy Initiative. She's published many books and articles. She's a former journalist, and she holds a BA from Yale University and a PhD from Emory University. She's also been a Fulbright Scholar in Russia and a scholar with the Kennan Institute. So after our guest speaks, we are going to have a question and answer period. For our online audience, if you'd like to ask a question, you may submit your question in one of three ways. So by email, kennan@wilsoncenter.org, by Twitter @Kennan Institute, or by Facebook. And if you can please include your name and affiliation when submitting your questions. And then for our in-person audience, and we have a fantastic audience today, a filled room, which is wonderful. If you could also mention your name and affiliation, and if you can find a microphone nearby or ask your neighbor for one so we make sure everyone can hear. So finally, today's discussion is being recorded. So Sarah, please.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction, and thank you, everyone, for coming today and everyone online. I don't know if it's appropriate to say it's a wonderful day to talk about Russian propaganda, but it's certainly an interesting day to talk about it based on recent reports about the Russian government through RT paying influencers. And also because, and this is a line I've been using a lot in recent talks, this election, the upcoming election is, I think, the most important election for the Russians in modern history, or perhaps history. It really matters to Russia who gets elected. You know, if Trump is elected, he is far more Russia-friendly. He's made signals about not supporting Ukraine, or certainly pushing for a peace treaty that Ukraine does not want. And Harris has done pretty much the opposite. So it's an extraordinary time in American politics and Russian politics and the convergence of the two. So I think it is a good day to talk about Seeing Red. I'd like to thank the Wilson Center, not just for having me here today, but for really being the genesis of the project. I was a fellow in 2018-19, and I did a lot of the basic research, and they gave me the time and space and intellectual engagement to get started with the project, and I'm very grateful. And I'd also like to give a shout out to my co-author, Gordon, who teaches in the north of Iceland, where I was last week, where we did a book launch, which was great fun. And Gordon is the organized one. All right, so I will try to stay as organized as possible. And with that, I want Jennifer to hit me with a large object at 25 minutes. So if you could warn me maybe at 5 minutes and then at 25 minutes, that would be fantastic. I'm actually going to say. So let's talk about Seeing Red, Russian Propaganda and American News. The book has, well, I'll do a little bit of a truncated version of the book. Like all scholars, I want to talk about everything, but let's not do that. The fundamental basis of the book is, in order to understand what Russia is telling us, we need to understand what Russia wants. What is Russia's view of the world? And fortunately, that's pretty easy, right? They don't make a secret of that they want. So the book employs the notion of strategic narratives, the stories that states tell about themselves. And we'll talk a minute about what I and some of my co-authors have identified as some key strategic narratives. The other thing about Russia, unlike the United States, is it speaks with a fairly unified voice. There aren't 2 or 3 or 4 political parties that have differing voices. So that makes it easy, in a sense, for a political communication scholar such as myself. The book talks about 3 pivotal moments in U.S. history. For any scholars in here, I'd like to tell you we initially had 4, but 1 did not work out. But then there was the widespread invasion of Ukraine that created a really pivotal moment of study. That sounds very cold, but in the sense it was an important event to study. We initially were thinking about studying COVID and how Russians did disinformation about COVID vaccines. But it was kind of an own goal for the Russians. It didn't really work out, so we went with other things. The book also uses human content analysis. So it uses me and co-authors and many, many coders and researchers reading through a lot of material from Russia, mostly English language propaganda on RT and on the Russian presidential website and places like that. But also we read a lot of news stories related to the election. We then used computational methods to translate that into a more automated way, trying to get the human out of the loop, in a sense, trying to be more scientific. And this, if you read the book, I think we have an 80% success rate with that. There's still more to be learned. So I've already talked about this, why this is a critical election. So let's go on to how does Russia use American political messages to promote its view of the world? Okay, well, let's get back to, what I talked about in the beginning. What is strategic narrative? So it's a coherent system of interrelated and sequentially organized stories that share a common rhetorical desire, I'm reading a slide, which I should never do, to resolve a conflict by establishing audience expectations. So it's what you want the world to think of you. And it's interesting when we think about Russia, right? Because I think there are a lot of scholars in the room who've studied Russia, and we could go back through time and say, well, during the communist era, that was very clear. The post-communist era, much less clear, and it's now clear again. In classes, I've encouraged students to think about their own countries. What is America's strategic narrative? I could have answered that question 20 years ago, a little bit harder today, right? So these are the strategic narratives that, in my Wilson work, this is what Russia would like you to know about Russia. And I get this mostly from distilling Putin's speech, but also looking at things like RT and Sputnik and other English language propaganda. I do speak Russian. The joke is kind of I turned to English language Russian propaganda because my Russian was getting a little rusty. But I did want to see how it was portrayed in English. So Russia is a resurgent great nation. We protect Russians no matter where they live. The West, particularly NATO and the United States, is out to destroy Russia, and democracy is flawed and failing. Now, if you look at these strategic narratives, they are all justifications for the war in Ukraine in particular, right? Now, interestingly, Putin did introduce some new narratives for the war in Ukraine, such as Ukraine is overrun with neo-Nazis, Ukraine doesn't exist as a nation. But these are kind of side gigs, right? These are the ones that Russians come back to all the time. And they get to project them into what is a struggling media and political environment in the United States. So not only does Russia have a coherent strategic narrative, a coherent plan, communication plan, but there's some very fertile ground here in the United States. One, our media ecosystem is struggling. We've had a massive loss of media jobs and media outlets, particularly local outlets. So there's kind of a news desert going on where people might turn to a website run by Russia if it had useful news in their area. And they might not know it was, run by Russia. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there is a political division in the United States. So this is also quite helpful in terms of propaganda because you can push at divisions. And it's particularly helpful that supporters of Trump often echo some of Russia's strategic narratives, particularly that democracy is flawed and failing. They're not doing it for the same reasons, right? I don't think. And it's funny, when you're a Russian propaganda specialist, the first thing that people ask me is there a sex tape for Trump? I'm just going to throw that out there. And I'm going to talk about that, not because I don't know and I don't care, but when I do this work, I'm not that interested in motivations. I'm interested in actually looking at the content and the outcome, as it were. So I couldn't really tell you perhaps why someone sitting in Iowa would read RT and think that, Russia was justified in invading Ukraine. That's not what my work does. What my work does is identify strategic narratives and look at how they play out and look at where there is particularly convergence of right-wing media and Russian propaganda. So let's talk some case studies. Always fun. The 2020 elections, they're just a dim memory at this point. We're all a little overwhelmed. Now this is where you can tell I'm an academic, right? Because I created a really awful looking chart, but So we analyzed several thousand news stories. We looked at mainstream media, such as Washington Post, USA Today. We looked at Fox News, and we also looked at RT and Sputnik, right? And so we thought about where there might be convergences between Russian propaganda and American news, because that's the title of the book, right? So we had to do that. And Trump has often complained that it's Russia, 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 that everyone keeps bringing up Russiagate, keeps bringing up Russia, and he felt that during his term as president, that this undermined his authority as president. So unsurprisingly, those who support Trump also will support the notion of Russophobia. So Russophobia is this notion that people criticize Russia unfairly and for their own ends, that there's nothing wrong with Russia, that people are just being completely unfair. So we can see that we can see some significant differences. So Trump messaging in 2020, he was ignoring Russiagate. He was convinced that Russophobia was a conspiracy brought about by the Democrats. He attacked the free media, and he amped up this notion of Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist, and it only really exists as a label, although some protesters have used it. The notion that Antifa was a large conspiratorial group supported by the Democrats that was sowing chaos on American streets. And, the Russian propaganda lapped this up because it works into the threat to democracy. Unsafe streets as well. So we saw a real difference in the way most U.S. Media covered these issues and how Russia tried to project the narratives. The exception was generally Fox. And you can say, oh, well, is Fox in the pay of the Russians? No, I wouldn't think so. I mean, I don't have any evidence one way or the other, but I wouldn't think so. Fox was supporting Trump. Trump was supporting Russian narratives. Ergo, Fox News often echoed Russian narratives. We had some trouble with our coders who couldn't tell the difference unless it was labeled between Russia Today, RT content and Fox content. We also found that when we trained a linguistic classifier to find discussions about Russophobia. Worked really well. It could find them even when the word was not present. We trained it on RT and it worked on Fox. So linguistically, there was a lot of similarity. So what we see in the 2020 election is we see that Trump is a gift to Russian propaganda because Trump espouses and supports many stories that support the notion that democracy is flawed and failing. Doesn't talk about Russians. In fact, interestingly, I did an analysis of his acceptance speech for the nomination. He basically doesn't talk about this. He glancingly mentions Russia, but not in any meaningful way. But the notion, particularly him pushing this, the notion that the election is not going to be fair, is just fantastic for the notion that democracy doesn't work. So that was one case study. In the midst of writing the book, it's funny to think back, and we started writing the book about 2019. And I remember what's the day that Stop This Deal happened, and I thought, well, this is terrible for democracy, but it's a great case study, which is, you have to sort of take what it is. So for Stop This Deal, we looked at right-wing news. We decided not to do a comparison of Fox with regular news. We were more interested in looking at what we knew to be right-wing outlets, and also particularly Newsmax we knew to be often carry content that was sympathetic to Russian narratives. What was it? Russian narratives? Is it Trump narratives? It's really Trump narratives. So interestingly, we looked at election coverage as percentage of articles, and this is post-campaign essentially. So it's November, December, January, and I think everyone in the room remembers what was going on in the conversation. You know, Trump was claiming the election was invalid. Other actors were pushing back. There was a lot of lawsuits going on. Eventually, there's the Dominion lawsuit, which was incredibly valuable to our research because Fox News was claiming that Dominion and Smartmatic voting machines didn't work, right? That they were part of this vast conspiracy. Dominion and Smartmatic, they both sued. Dominion settled, but there was a lot of discovery in the case that showed that Fox knew that this was propaganda, and they said it anyway because they wanted to keep their audience, because their audience, they were losing audience to the farther right wing. So if we look at this, we say, okay, so election coverage, quite a lot of election coverage on Newsmax, about 30% of their content is on the election. That's a lot, even though there's a controversy going on. Sputnik is still covering it. RT is still covering it. Now the red, so that's, the black marks are, you know, how much coverage there was. So it ranged from a high of about 28% on Newsmax to a low of about 15% on RT. Okay. However, the red bars are how much of this content talked about stop the steal, right? Mentions election fraud. So on Fox News had the least amount, but Newsmax had quite a bit, had about half of its coverage. So, you know, what is coverage? You know, are you using this story to perpetuate the Russian propaganda line that elections are stolen, so democracy doesn't work, so we need a new world order in which Russia plays an important part? Now, here's a fun chart as well, and I'm going to credit Gordon with all this hard work. Because he went through, you know, we tried actually, okay, confession, we tried to do this with computational analysis and we weren't satisfied with the results. So actually Gordon went through and manually coded the stories. And we see here, okay, you're bringing up election fraud. Are you just saying, oh my God, there was fraud? Or are we actually saying, okay, Trump's claiming there's fraud, but here's some people who are saying there isn't fraud, and here's some evidence. And we actually see here the American news system working a little better. Because Fox News has, well, they do say they're fair and balanced, but in this case, they were much more balanced than RT and Sputnik. And Newsmax is quite fascinating, because Newsmax is clearly pushing the propaganda. And Newsmax doesn't really hide that. You know, Newsmax does not, I think, have pretensions to being the type of mainstream media outlet that Fox does. Newsmax is much more overt in support of Trump's audience and Trump's wishes. So I did want to present that, yes, there was a lot of discussion about election fraud, but on Fox, at least, there's also pushback to a degree, even though they later get sued about it. Okay. So this is divergent motives, but common themes. And I want to take a little bit of time to talk about my more recent research that comes out of the book. I'm not going to talk about our research in Chapter 6. You can read it, though. Chapter 6 talks about the widespread invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It talks about how Putin developed some new narratives, and we have some speculation about, well, all your other narratives worked as justification. Why do you need a new narrative? And that's one interesting question. And these narratives were about, you know, neo-Nazis colonizing Ukraine, and they were about how Ukraine and Russia were really one, and Ukrainians weren't really a people, and all this propaganda. But it was also interesting to me in the sense how clearly it signaled a change. And I have to admit, in terms of the Kursk invasion, I'm waiting. I'm waiting to see a narrative, and I haven't seen one yet. And I think that's quite significant. The fact that the Russian government hasn't found a way to spin this, and they're very good at that, right? So I would be interested in the Q&A if anyone has any feelings or thoughts about what's going on with that. So I want to talk about these convergences, about different motivations, but convergences. And I haven't talked, I usually do quite a lot. I haven't talked about method. It's in the book, but in general, when I'm talking about and making these comparisons, it is through content analysis of thousands of articles, both in the Western media and in RT, Sputnik, sometimes Putin speeches. Right. So what are Trump's strategic narratives about Ukraine? And I think that's a really, really important question to think about, right? And Trump is easier to, Trump's individual statements can be a little, what's the right word? Rambling, I think would be a polite way to say, right? He's not always the most on-point speaker, but his overarching narratives tend to be fairly coherent. So he's isolationist. He's America first. Stop sending money abroad to fight in places like Ukraine. I mean, most of that money is being spent in the United States, but, whatever. He is a great world leader, so he can sort these things out. And he does support authoritarian leaders. And that to me, is a little bit of a puzzling one, but it does occur. So, right. So again, a badly designed chart for you. But let's think this through, right? So I've also cut off, in a truly professorial way, I've cut off the labels at the top. Go, Sarah. Right. All right. So over here, America First, that column, that's Trump. Okay, these are Trump's, and I just went through them, right? And on the far column, these are Russian strategic narratives. The West is out to destroy Russia. A new one, Ukraine has no right to exist. The West is out to destroy Russia, and Russia is a resurgent great nation. So when we think about the messages in the middle, right? So on the top, yeah, Putin says NATO is an existential threat to Russia. Trump says NATO is bad and a waste of money, right? We don't know how serious he is about this. We sometimes don't know with Trump how much he's taunting or sort of punking the Democrats and the liberals. But he does say this, right? Okay, those are different motivations, but it comes out as a lack of support for NATO, which is extremely significant in the war in Ukraine. Right? Now, where they converge, I would argue, in a more worrying way, is there should be a peace treaty in Ukraine, and it should be immediate. And that is something Trump has said. An immediate peace treaty in Ukraine is very unlikely to favor Ukrainian interests, right? So it's coming from, I don't think Trump is supporting Russia as a resurgent great nation or the idea that Ukraine has no right to exist, maybe, but I don't think so. But you wind up saying the same thing, so that's really, really useful for Russian propaganda. And then there's some other issues, Putin, Americans shouldn't be funding Ukrainian defense. Trump says Americans shouldn't be funding things overseas. And finally, that the last one is that, Trump interestingly often voices support for Putin. Doesn't that often voice support for Russia or the great nation of Russia? So, but is it kind of like Charles de Gaulle, or I guess initially it was the last French king who said, "The state, it's me, l'état, c'est moi." It comes out as the same thing. So, this is coming into an environment where news organizations are struggling with covering both Trump and Russia, and a lot of my work has talked about, how do you cover a rogue candidate? How do you cover a candidate who says things that are either sometimes untrue and sometimes unacceptable to how Americans like to talk about themselves in public? And it's interesting because I have a colleague, Jen Goldbeck, who has spent the summer going to Trump rallies and talking to Trump supporters and trying to understand where they're coming from. And one of my favorite quotes that she has said is, yeah, Trump supporters say, yeah, we know he's an asshole, but he's our asshole, right? And this leaves journalists really struggling to know, how do we talk about this in the sort of one side or the other. At the same time, they're struggling within the sort of objectivity model of journalism. He said, she said, or they said, right? How do you? Well, they're saying that immigrants are eating cats and dogs. What's the other side of that story? Immigrants aren't eating cats and dogs. It's very difficult. And in part, this is because newsrooms look like this, right? So there's sort of a sucking hole at the center of journalism because of the financial collapse of the journalistic model. There's fewer and fewer people who can stay in the profession and sort of develop the skills that you need to deal with these complex and changing world. And sadly, in my book, and it really hurt my heart to do this, I do criticize the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post for their coverage of NATO, because quite frequently they'll allow Putin to make statements about NATO that are untrue or very one-sided, and they don't counter it in many cases. So yes, NATO pressure caused Russia to invade Ukraine. Let's all just sit with that for a moment and go, yeah, no, that doesn't really make sense. And you could then explain the history of NATO, or you could talk about the more nuances of it, but they often don't. And it's also a fact, and I'm probably sitting in a room with more Russian specialists than I generally do, but there are more people who speak Latin than Russian in the United States, or who have studied it. So there's not a lot of Russian specialists who can help you out here. And this is why this is the New York Times newsroom, which is very pretty, and I just wanted to, kind of looks like the Wilson Center in a way. But I wanted to put it up there just to say, this is not like someone, a tiny little county newspaper. This is an extraordinarily well-resourced newsroom. And we face the problem of popular right-wing news outlets, especially Fox, who've chosen to broadcast, and I'm just going to flat out call it Trump's propaganda, right? Because, and hey, Democrats have propaganda too, right? All politicians at some point are putting out messages that are more about getting them reelected than informing the public. Fine. However, I would argue that Trump has certainly chosen to lean far more heavily into propaganda. And we know from the Dominion lawsuit, and we talk about this in the book, Fox knew. Fox knew this information was not correct, but about electoral issues, but they chose to broadcast it anyway. And that sort of spelled the end of Tucker Carlson, but he enjoyed a resurgence on Russian TV. So there's that as well. And finally, and this is the last slide, I think. Oh, except for, shilling for the book, yeah. And we may want to talk about the Tenor Media case and the case of the influencers being paid by RT, hence the Russian government, to push Russian propaganda narratives. And I just see this as an evolution of everything the book talks about. Well, of course, I would see it that way because I wrote the book. And finally, here is the book with a cover designed by my daughter, Laura Cross. Mm-hmm. And you may download a free chapter there. I have a couple of copies I could sell here. I am going to give one to Will, just because, he's so great. But I think I'm out of time, and yeah, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. No, that was fantastic, and you were perfectly on time, so you didn't have to worry at all. So I'm sure, as you mentioned, this is a topic that everyone is talking about, so I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions in the audience. Just as a reminder, so again, for our in-person audience, just raise your hand, and please make sure you do use one of the microphones that's nearby and introduce yourself. And for our online audience, please feel free to start sending in your questions. You can do that by email or Twitter or Facebook. So while people are formulating your questions, can I ask you a quick question to start with? I thought it was great when you put up the 4 points about the narrative, strategic narrative. And then I thought it was interesting you mentioned Ukraine, the invasion, the full-scale invasion, that shifted the narrative, and then Kursk, you're waiting to see what's going to happen. So question I have for you, how often do you think the narrative changes to satisfy a change in objectives, and how often it's changing objectives are forcing the narrative to change? Were you able to chart kind of a pattern in that at all?
I felt like when we were writing the book, I think. Let me say right away, I think Russian propagandists are pretty good at responding to events. They did a really good job with getting a lot of mileage out of January 6th, right? I really got the feeling right up into 2022 that this was a fairly ordered and regimented way of carrying out propaganda. I felt like the strategic narratives were pretty stable. In late 2021 and early 2022, the narrative shifted. I remember in January 2022, I was doing some research, and I read what, there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and I thought, something's up, you know. So I do think they signal, and right up until Kursk, I thought they could handle a shift and respond. I just haven't seen the response. I'm also kind of worried about nuclear threat narratives, but let's not depress everyone today. We'll just do that.
No, great.
I hope I answered this.
Yeah, no, that was great. I have some other questions, but I'll let our audience jump in first. So yes, please, sir.
Thank you. Just a small point. The Russian strategic narrative is nothing else than an update of Nazi Germany's strategic narrative. It's pretty much 100% correlation. That is just a remark and a question. Why is the U.S. media, and it's not only the media, it's the government also, many people in the government, that are sort of so much influenced by the Kremlin? Is it money? Is it compromise? Are they compromised by some dossiers? What is it?
Well, who do you mean in the government specifically? Do you mean Trump or?
It does not matter. Look at President Biden, to this day, trying to restrict the Ukrainians from what is normal, right? Using weaponry to fight your enemy, right? He is not doing it. Trump is saying the same thing almost. It seems that, Jake Sullivan, for example, see these people, if you listen to the Ukrainians, you will feel very bad about America.
You know, there are two very vivid debates in my world. One is, what is the value of comparing the Russians to the Nazis? And some people feel that you should just do that, right? And just have that conversation. And other people feel that going down the rabbit hole of saying they're Nazis is ignoring some nuances, right? But and it's I have to say, it's a very vibrant conversation going on. In terms of, I have to say, it's almost wrong of me to say that I understand what the Ukrainians are suffering, because I can't. You know, that what's going on in Ukraine and what's happened in Ukraine is terrible. But that being said, you know, and I think there have been some members of Congress who have said things about Russia and Ukraine that are very regrettable and wrong. That being said, I think there's a big difference in what a Harris administration would do to support Ukraine and what a Trump administration would do to support Ukraine. And perhaps you don't see that difference. Perhaps you're saying, well, none of it's enough. But I don't really see Biden per se buying Russian propaganda, but I do see him making choices about not wanting to antagonize Russia to the point of total war. But maybe for Ukrainians, that's a cop-out. I don't know, but yeah.
Hi, I'm Austin Gary. I'm a research scholar here at the Kinnan. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about where Russian strategic narratives in places like RT or Russian strategic narratives to domestic audiences and Russian kind of messaging overall, where that fits in an overall kind of propaganda ecosystem that includes things like paying the social media influencers, farming things on like bot farms and posts on Facebook and social media and all this that we're hearing about election interference. So could you just talk about kind of the news media and sort of talk us through like top-down state to uptake? Thank you.
Yeah, that is a great question, and I have to say the book focuses on news media for quite deliberately, and in that sense it lacks that element of, so it's just news and it doesn't focus on the whole ecosystem around it, which I think every year gets more and more important, particularly Telegram. And I think if I have, well, I have many self-criticisms, but one major self-criticism I have is that I have not studied Telegram, where I think a lot of this is going on. My hope is that some great scholar, perhaps you, would pick up on narratives and measure narratives in social media, or compare Russian domestic narratives, which I don't follow, and I gave up on following. I wrote one book about Russian domestic media more years ago than I care to say. Let's just say Putin was young, I was a lot younger, yeah, everyone was younger. And I think Russian domestic media is complex and fascinating and fast-moving and dynamic. And like, for example, entertainment media. Yeah, there's a lot going on in terms of narratives and patriotism. So the answer to that question is, I have the narrow strand of news. But I hope others will say, well, okay, well, what's a Russian strategic narrative that's going on in cop shows in Russia, for example? I think would be really interesting.
Sir, please.
My name is Michael Hurley. I'm a retired U.S. Foreign Service officer. In fact, recently re-retired. I worked with something called the Global Engagement Center in the State Department. I think I'll read this book with interest, but there's a whole world out there where the Russians are very active, and we have been tracking what they're doing in Africa, Latin America, Middle East, you name it. They're very active everywhere, and it's very destructive, and it's very much, it pretty much follows the categories you've got there, that Ukraine doesn't exist, the West is evil, NATO is bad, and all those sorts of things. But it's an entire world out there where they are very active. And of course, in the State Department, and partly in answer to this gentleman's question, of course, we did some work on exposing Sputnik and RT recently, both the Department of Justice, which can work on some of these sorts of things, and the Department of State, which by law cannot work on propaganda in the United States, the Smith-Mundt legislation, though we are accused of doing so.
Yep.
But it's a very active business of pointing out that RT, in fact, has intel duties and all sorts of things. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, I think with the Global Engagement Center, they would not have given me money for my book.
No.
Because, because I talk about this intersection of American politics. I'm actually also kind of haunted by your comment about, how Ukrainians feel about America. And one thing that does frustrate me is I don't really see America, well, we're not a dictatorship, so it's a little bit harder for us to have one unified messaging system and have little temniki that we give out to journalists and all that. But, I don't know how well we're doing at telling America's story to the world anymore. And maybe we're just in a place where we can't because we're very divided. But I think that makes it very easy for Russian influence in Africa and other places to say, hey, there's a lot wrong with America. Why not look at a world where Russia is a dominant player?
Great, thank you. Ma'am.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's excellent. It seems like there's a question that the U.S., whether it's state administration, is sort of stuck in strategic vision or not having one. And I wonder if it's some kind of difficulty in having a level of understanding that the world is geopolitically and geostrategically in great shift, and that we may not end up where we have been historically, and what do we do about that? My name's Anita Parlow, and I just finished a book project, co-edited on climate and conflict, and I'm now writing about the impact of Ukraine on the Arctic. And so one of the things that I've noticed in the context of the High North, particularly, is hybrid war.
Right.
Not in a kinetic sense, but in a against civilian populations in a non-kinetic sense, and quite effective and enormously creative, actually, in their ability to be destructive, both at cyber and other levels, both on the ocean and on the land. And I wonder what kind of views, which you put together, state and defense,
You mean in terms of, like, what do you mean by looking at separate events? I was not,
Well, in terms of prevention, in terms of response, and in terms of understanding of how, if it's a cyber attack and one,
Oh, right.
sea level, below sea level, breaking cables,
Right.
A variety of elements that may not seem connected, but to your points about, the interest in Russia maintaining its geostrategic position in terms of diminishing the power of the West, in terms of the alliances, it's bringing in the BRICS up into the high north.
Yep.
So it's a clear vision. I mean, I don't know what it is, but it's clearly a clear vision, more so than it seems that, and this is, I'm not sure of this, but more so it seems than our capacity or interest or will or some combination of financing to both not only respond, but to anticipate and to develop an alliances within the West where there are no gaps that they can start pressing through.
Yeah, I do think we struggle, and it speaks to this gentleman's point about the Global Engagement Center in that, so we have this State Department funded, I think it's State Department, right, yeah, that's looking at propaganda overseas, but everything's connected, right? Like and I actually do believe the Global Engagement Center only looks at overseas propaganda. There's no conspiracy theories here, but it is frustrating in a sense that what's the major U.S. agency or effort that is looking at hybrid warfare? There isn't one, right? Well, yeah, no. I mean, the FBI does domestic disinformation, right? But I think they're under-resourced. So, well, I guess everyone's, so, great, we have a space, what is it, Space Force. I can never get that right. But we don't have a joined-up way of thinking about hybrid warfare, absolutely. And I think, things fly under the radar that are really part of a broader campaign. So, yeah.
That was excellent. I'll take another, just a reminder for our online audience, if someone wants to submit a question. So remember, you can do it 3 ways, if you've got email or Twitter or Facebook. But take a question here.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jim Warsh from Washington University in St. Louis, and I worked on Russia and national memory. I had a book in 2021, How Nations Remember, a narrative
I know,
approach.
I know that book.
Well, you're on, not surprisingly, I think you're really on the right track talking about narratives. Your strategic narrative stuff is great. But I think we don't pay enough attention sometimes to the very nature of narratives, because narratives are a particular way of representing the world that don't follow the standard logic we're used to in rational choice kinds of things. They grasp things together into a package, and for that reason, they're very hard to resist with information. So, I mean, we all have this experience. Can't you see what's right in front of you? Yes, I can. I'll tell you what it is, but it's completely different from what you have. And furthermore, I think in order to get what we're getting at here, we oftentimes talk about top-down. We're talking a lot about top-down, but I'm a big believer in bottom-up kind of narrative templates, underlying codes of narratives. And just one example, for example, I studied Russian or Soviet then Russian textbooks about the Great Patriotic War. And what I ended up finding was when the Soviet Union collapsed, some of my Russian colleagues and friends said, wow, this is great. We can tell stuff we never could say before. We're completely new stories. You look deeper at this underlying narrative template, it's the same story with different characters. Basically, the communists are no longer at the vanguard of leading the charge, but the great Russian people. Plot line is exactly the same. So I think narrative is really where a lot of things are, and I think your notion of strategic narratives, I'm still trying to figure out all the implications. It's really powerful.
Yeah, that's a really great point about narrative. Yeah, strategic narrative was written first in Forging the World, which Alistair Miskimen, Ben Laughlin, and Laura Roselle. But going back to strategic narratives for a second, I'm starting to believe that the real power lies in conspiracy narratives. Yeah. So, and that's my next project, I think, is thinking about the power of and the prevalence of conspiracy. And this was born out of a shouting match I had with my brother-in-law recently. It ended with me screaming, "It's the textbook definition of insurrection." So, and he's a very smart guy, and he's completely, there's no ability to have any kind of rational conversation. I've been teaching for 30 years, so you do run into that from time to time. But in general, if you present people with facts and have a discussion, you can move forward, right? You're maybe not going to agree. So I think, is it a conspiracy that democracy is flawed and failing? Well, I think that depends on how you look at it. I mean, democracy fails all the time. It's the nature of democracy, right? But have we come to an end game with it? I don't know. But I love, I'm going to go back and reread your book. And if I didn't cite it, I should have.
Yeah, we'll do that, we'll do that.
Thank you. Yes, down at the end of the table.
I'm Sergey Zhuk, fellow at Wilson Center, and I have a question about connection of this narrative, Russian strategic narrative, to traditional Russian intelligence or KGB intelligence purpose to promote Soviet or Russian interests in the world. Did you cover this? Because Trump was targeted by KGB as early as 1987. It's open sources. You don't need to go to archives. He was invited to Leningrad, St. Petersburg, invited to Moscow. Everything was paid by Intourist. It's cover organization for KGB, obviously. And he brought his first lady, who was connected to Czech intelligence service. So how all these connections of Trump influenced his pro-Soviet, pro-Russian views? Did you cover this? Because it's obvious, it's in open sources, you don't need to. I'm a historian, I just wanted to dig the roots of this.
You will be proud to hear that I do a full chapter that talks about, yes, because I am very firm in my belief that the Soviet echoes in Russian ways of doing things are very important, right? That's an important part of the history, important part of that. I also have a KGB file on me, apparently, because I didn't get invited to a hotel, and, no one offered me any special services. But I studied Russian in 1985 and 1989 in the Soviet Union. Apparently, I also have an FBI file, because apparently anyone who studies Russian has one. But I've never bothered to look that up. Is Trump personally compromised, and that's why he says good things about Russia? I don't think Trump would care if a sex tape came out about him. I think he'd put it up on his website, and Trump. So I mean, I don't. Yeah, it just doesn't. It's just one of those things that probably, yeah, there might be something there, but I don't think it's what is the problem, right? Because I think other things he says and does are far more valuable to the Russians than, having some kind of sway.
So he's a useful idiot.
Well,
who could be used by any foreign influence.
Yeah, I think to supporters he's not, though. So and he couldn't be too much of an idiot if he actually managed to get elected president. So that's okay. That's yeah. But he is saying things that resonate with a lot of Americans. A lot of those things also resonate with Russian propaganda. That really could have been the whole book. Mm-hmm. And I don't. Why did I write like 250 pages? I don't know. It's just crazy talk. But yeah, no. I love your fact. I got in a lot of trouble back in 2007 because I wrote an article that said the neo-Soviet model of the media. Everyone's like, "Oh my God, Sarah, no." I'm like, "Look, it's really carefully argued, and now it's my most cited article." So ha ha. But yeah, I do think it's important to know Russian history, know Soviet history. I know Will agree with me as a yeah. And it's so often kind of glossed over or forgotten, or we can talk about it in this way. Yeah. It's like not knowing Ukrainian history. That's not acceptable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other.
Thank you. Is there one back? Great.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sandra de Dosa. I'm a current Howard sophomore. I'm a political science major and musical theater minor. I first wanted to thank you for this presentation. It was very insightful. And I had a question. You started to talk a little bit about news media and journalism and their coverage of Russia, and you also spoke a little bit about influencers. And I was interested in hearing more about your perspective of social media, specifically about citizen reporters, like potentially swaying or skewing the opinions of people on this topic of Russia.
Yeah, that's a great question, and shout out to the Howard students who came out. I'm going to sort of flail a little bit on this question, just as I answered her. I didn't study social media. I did teach a social media class for 10 years, so I have no illusions. I know that people of a younger generation than me get a lot of their news through influencers, through social, not that that's the only way they're doing it, but that's a lot of what they're hearing. So I think the case in which Russia Today operatives paid the money to the influencers shows that it's a whole new era. It's a whole new game. We need a whole new book for that particular issue. But you could still use strategic narratives to say, and I think actually I only read it once, but I read the Justice Department charge of the influencers, and they do have very specific instances where they were told, you will push this narrative. I'm like, yes, narratives rule. Yeah, so I'm looking to your generation to do that study. So there you go.
Excellent. Thank you for the question. And I know we have a wide audience. Is there anyone else in,
Someone
if
back
you're
there.
not seeing, please just walk up to the table as well. So there's
Was someone?
yes,
Yeah,
please. And
okay,
then
great.
after that, we'll go back there. Yep.
My name is Artem Girgun, research scholar, Kennan Institute. My question, maybe it's a bit of a specific one. I know that Russia Today is sanctioned, but what about Sputnik? Because last week I was traveling in my car from here to Philadelphia, and I could listen to Sputnik radio just as long as I could go to Philadelphia.
I
That's
don't
my
know if
que-
this is a Philadelphia specific issue.
No, I don't know. Sorry.
I will do the smart answer and say, I don't know, but I would definitely look that up. And I'm also confused too. I know that, for example, RT's now been banned from Meta products, right? So that's Facebook, Instagram. I mean, who's looking at WhatsApp? I mean, you can't really, it's encrypted, so we don't really know what goes on there. But I think I could still access these things with a little tiny bit of effort. You know, if it's not banned in another English-speaking country, I can just pick it up there. So I think that's a good question. A couple of journalists have asked me the question about, you know, does banning RT, well, first it's banned as a media organization back in 2022, and then now it's been deplatformed till they rename themselves something else and come back on the Meta product. And I think being deplatformed from the Meta platforms means you can't find the swing voters as easily. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Because you could go on Truth Social and have a really good time, because your content's probably going to be picked up and echoed that democracy is flawed and failing, and, you know, Antifa is running wild in the streets, and Black Lives Matter is destroying America, you know, all that stuff. But I guess they're going to have to figure out. But maybe, you know, if you can get it in your car, maybe, I don't know. Is it on Sirius XM? I have no idea. It's a good question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I know we had a question in the back.
Way in the back.
Okay. I'm currently studying Russian at an intermediate level at Howard University. And just regarding your, regarding the strategic narratives that you touched upon in your presentation, do you think that Trump has completely or slightly abandoned the preservation of democracy in his outward support of the authoritarian leader that has demonstrated some fascist tendencies in his dictatorship?
So I haven't done a formal study of Trump messaging recently, but, you know, I'm an American citizen, so I've seen a lot of it. I would say he, in particular, in claiming that the election will be invalid unless he is elected, that is an authoritarian move, because elections sit at the very heart of democracy, and if we don't have free and fair elections, we do not have democracy. He's also attacked the press consistently, even sometimes Fox News. He's very capricious, but he's also called the press the enemy of the people, right? So, yes, he has consistently undermined and attacked democratic institutions. Now, his supporters would say that he's fighting for a vision of America that is unfettered by these conspiratorial Democrats that have been running things and manipulating behind the scenes and taking things away from people. So it kind of depends. I mean, I'm just trying to be fair here, but I actually, yeah, I mean, if you just sat back and you were a content analyst person and you said, are these messages supporting authoritarianism and attacking democracy, you'd have to say yes. I mean, there's just no other way around it. I can't wait for the emails after that one, but yeah.
I'm going to ask you another question. It's circling back to the gentleman from the State Department, the Global Engagement Center, and also one of your 4 points in the strategic narrative, talking about, Russia's justification for Russians abroad. I'm curious, there's been a fair amount of talk, right, about like the foreign agents law and how that's appropriated by other countries and they're wanting to replicate it, and other things countries are replicating that Russia does. Are you finding, again, I'm curious about the direction here, that other countries are maybe replicating similar type strategic narratives, or do you find more Russia pushing that out in places? Or again, and maybe this isn't something you've looked at, but I'm just curious to know if you're picking up that in anything you're studying.
I haven't looked, and I'll be unfair by asking Global Engagement Center person, but because he's been looking at the narratives. I would say this: Russia's pretty good about picking up on what matters to individual audiences. It's not just one plug and play. Russia's a resurgent great nation, but it's more, oh, there's way too many immigrants in this country, so let's write about that, or, whatever. So is it that countries, is it like a virus, you were saying? Is it a sense that, okay, we're going to project these narratives, and then people start believing them? I think it's more that they try, as they do in the United States, and I think fairly successfully, right? We're talking about Russia like a lot more in the past several years than we have. I used to be really unpopular at cocktail parties. Maybe I still am. But, people now when I say, oh, I study Russian, media, people are like, wow, I really want to talk to you. It did not happen 10 years ago, just so we're clear. So I've rambled, but I think that, so what you're saying is, what you're asking is then, how effective this is?
I was just curious if you saw any causality between, so this Russia doing this, similar to kind of like, other states picking up the foreign agents law or other things. Are you seeing this as similar, like, oh, this idea of narratives, we either export it or other places appropriate it?
That's really interesting. I don't have any data on that. I would imagine that even though they adapt well to different country situations, I think they stick. They particularly are interested in a world order in which Russia has a far more dominant role. Ultimately, that's the goal, right? And so you got to undermine democracy to do that. And that's can be a fairly attractive narrative in places where America is not popular for sometimes very well-founded reasons. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we have about 2 minutes left. Anyone have a final question?
Mr.
It's just one comment that Russia is still winning in Africa. Majority of African political regimes now have connections to Russia, including Russian special forces.
Yes.
And unfortunately, your book is an example of how America failed Russia, ignoring Russian threat, ignoring Russian imperialism. And I praise you for doing this book. And thank you very much. But Africa already lost, actually.
And there was one last question. Yeah,
Okay,
I want to make
great.
sure we get the woman on the side there, please.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Sarah. Hey. Oh, hi. Push the button.
I know it's green. Hi, Sarah. Good to see you again.
See you.
Did you look at, and I'm sorry I missed the first few minutes, but did you look at the influence of the Russian narrative related to Ukraine on American media? And can you talk just a little, I heard you say a little bit about that, but can you talk a little more about that, what you found?
Okay, so chapter 6 in the book, but briefly, American journalists let Russians get away with propaganda way too much, even elite journalists who should know better, particularly when Putin talks about how NATO caused him to invade Ukraine, which is disinformation, right? And also, they don't talk about the history and meaning of NATO in Eastern Europe. It was there, for a reason. Yeah, the short answer is yes, I do talk about that.
One of the things that the journalists often pick up, though, are American analysts who are talking about some of the history of Putin, of supposed U.S. and NATO promises to Putin in the aftermath of the Cold War in terms of admission of new countries. So I wonder, is there a way to discern how much American media are picking up on American analysts and experts, or versus on Russian propaganda, or or that is connected?
Yeah, I devote a great deal of the chapter to talking about research that has shown there was never any promise made in that way, and how journalists fail to challenge people. And I talk very specifically about Mark Kramer's work at Harvard, in which he's gone back in German, Russian, and English, all of the archives, and said that no, it's a complete misinterpretation of what was said. It was not one step eastward, related only to Germany, actually, and was irrelevant anyway. So yeah, no, I got very obsessed in a historical way with that, and very, I do talk about in the book that, by letting people just make comments and not calling up the historian, not calling up Will, for example, and just checking that comment is just helping Russian propaganda, and you shouldn't do that. So it's a very good point. It's a good point.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. We are now over time, so thank you for joining us this afternoon. Again, thank you to Oxford University Press. They have a discount code, which is AAFLYG6, and you can get 30% off a copy. And thank you again to our guests.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing everyone again soon.